Greetings from Pavlo Ardanov, Fulbright Research Scholar at the Agricultural Sustainability Institute, University of California, Davis, and co-founder of the NGO Permaculture in Ukraine. Welcome to the series of video lectures on designing crop polycultures, which is supported by the International Visegrad Fund. The topic of this lecture is intercropping and polyculture design principles. On the description to this video, you will find the links to different sections of these video lectures, as well as the slides where you can study spreadsheets to design your own intercropping schemes. Generally, polycultures are more productive, utilize soil resources and light more efficiently, resist pests, epidemics and weeds better, produce more varied and nutritional food, better utilize local resources, and contribute to economic stability, social equity, and farmers' direct participation in decision-making. In agroecosystems, biodiversity performs a variety of ecological services beyond the production of food, including recycling of nutrients, regulation of microclimate and local hydrological processes, suppression of undesirable organisms, and detoxification of noxious chemicals. Both planet biodiversity, which is determined by farmer, and associated, that colonizes the agroecosystem after it has been set up by the farmer, promote ecosystem functions in agroecosystem. For example, weeds are particularly important for sustaining pollinators and biocontrol organisms, and native plant species usually support more residential insects. Ecosystem functioning is improved not due to species richness per se, but rather by functional diversity, or functional differences between species and the relationships between species in space and time. Ecosystem productivity in diverse systems is enhanced by niche complementarity, where a community of species whose niches complement one another is more efficient in using resources. Due to similar resource needs and hence greater niche overlap, there is usually an intense competition between individuals of the same species for light, water, and nutrients. Different species use different resources or use the same resource but separated utilization in time or space. An example of temporal complementarity is sowing clover in the spring under a winter wheat cash crop. The growth of the main crop is not impaired by the growth of the legume, which remains poorly developed during the intercropping period, and then increases its growth rate once the wheat has been harvested. The components of the mixtures may be complementary in a spatial sense by exploiting different layers of the soil with their root system. An example is a closely spaced mixture of maize, bean and squash, where maize foraged relatively shallower. Common bean exploited the vertical soil profile more equally, while the root placement of squash depended on phosphorus availability, and the density of lateral root branching was significantly greater for all three species in polycultures than in the monocultures. An ideal leaf arrangement could be approached by a mixture of a tall erect-leaved plant genotype and a short prostrate-leaved genotype. For example, in the polyculture of durum wheat intercropped with winter pea, light use efficiently increased by 10%. Wheat yield in this polyculture increased by 20%. While complementarity refers to partitioning resources for reducing competition between species, facilitation enables positive interaction between plant species responsible for supplementary services. For instance, facilitation occurs when one species is able to utilize an initially unavailable nutrient pool in the soil thanks to the presence and action of another species. High competition is observed in a high-resource environment, while facilitation might be greater under harsh conditions. Thus, less fertile soils can potentially sustain higher diversity of mutually facilitating species, as well as higher plant diversity is required in stressful and suboptimal conditions in order to maximize biomass production. It has been demonstrated in ecology that the mix of life forms, not the mix of species, define ecosystem functioning. Thus, for convenience of designing polyculture cropping system, species are organized into functional groups, for example, reflecting symbiosis with nitrogen-fixing bacteria and with mycorrhizal fungi. Different polyculture design frameworks commonly emphasize the concept of multifunctional agriculture, as well as the importance of creating spaces and habitats for wildlife in the agricultural landscapes. Later presumes resource continuity at the landscape scale. There are two mimicry hypotheses for designing agroecosystems from natural ecosystems. First is that agroecosystems should mimic the structure and function of natural ecosystems existing in a given pedoclimatic zone. And the second is that agroecosystems should also mimic the diversity of species existing in natural ecosystems. Biodiversity conservation will not work without protecting at least 5% of remaining pristine habitats and diverting up to 8% of arable farmland to wildlife habitat, primarily by removing unproductive around field edges, can benefit farm profitability. Phosphorus assimilation can be facilitated by intercropping of phosphorus-mobilizing species, such as legumes. Nutrient capture and phosphorus mobilization, in particular on nutrient-poor soils with high leaching, can be associated with larger root surface area attributed to symbiosis with arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. Cereals excrete phytosiderophores and thus can improve availability of micronutrients such as iron and zinc for non-mobilizing dicotyledonous plants, contributing to natural biofortification of food products to alleviate micronutrient malnutrition. Improving nitrogen nutrition requires integration of leguminous or fibrous rooted crops in crop rotation, as cover crops or as intercrops. In addition to legumes having rhizobial association, there are other families of plants and groups of microorganisms capable of atmospheric nitrogen fixation, including even some native varieties of maize. In legumes intercropped with cereals, nitrogen fixation is higher than in monoculture, for example 3 times higher for pea intercropped with barley. Whereas under application of inorganic nitrogen, cereals overcompete intercropped legumes, and large phosphorus and nitrogen supply can substantially reduce both root exploration and the atmospheric nitrogen fixation rate by legumes. In several legumes species, nodulation is stimulated by mycorrhizal colonization. As nitrogen is highly mobile nutrient, it can be also easily lost by leaching, in particular from synthetic fertilizers, where only about 47% of added nitrogen is converted into harvested products. Slower nitrogen release from legume residues enable better synchronization with nitrogen demand of subsequent or interplanted crop. In addition, legumes can sequester carbon in soil and to a certain extent prevent nitrate leaching, though cereals and brassicaceae are more efficient nutrient scavengers. In order to minimize nutrient leaching and maximize carbon sequestration, the target is to increase longevity and the length of root systems by planting trees, perennial crops, and cover crops, as well as to diversify crop residues across time and space. Optimal resource utilization will be achieved by interplanting crops with shallow roots that will efficiently mobilize phosphorus, that is primarily located near the soil surface, with crops having so-called steep, chip, and deep root systems that can better access nitrogen and water that are frequently found in deeper soil layers. Diversifying on-farm vegetation or conservation biological pest control is a preventive method in contrast to curative methods prevailing in conventional agriculture. In general, conservation biological control is focused on increasing habitat diversity and connectivity. Mixtures of crop species and varieties are aimed to slow pathogen spread by slowing the rate and incidence of infection, by combining plants that differ in their susceptibility to pests and pathogens, improving plant health and inducing disease resistance, and by establishing more structurally complex environment. All plants respond to herbivore and pathogen damage with the enhanced emission of volatile organic compounds, and composition of this blend depend on the type of the wound and even the type of attacker. Plants in numerous taxa also respond with the secretion of extrafloral nectar. Both volatile organic compounds and extrafloral nectar, especially if combined, attract adult parasitoids and predators that can significantly reduce herbivore pressure on plants. Plants commonly attract and maintain carnivores by offering shelter, such as domatia in the form of cavities or trichome turf for ant and predatory mites, or food rewards such as pollen, floral nectar and extrafloral nectar, and plant sap. Spatial plant arrangement in the fence guild is defined by herbivore feeding behavior and dispersal capacity. Guild members function as anti-herbivore resource in 5 major ways. As insectary plants, providing pollen and nectar sources for herbivore predators and parasitoids. As repellent plants, either directly or indirectly causing the herbivore to fail to locate or reject its normal prey. As attractant plants or trap crops that function as an alternative prey for insect herbivore to protect the target crop during a critically susceptible growth stage. As decoy plants, which cause pest mortality or reduced fecundency because of the presence of toxins or because of the absence, deficiency or imbalance of certain nutritional materials. And as nursery plants, supporting alternative hosts for biocontrol organisms. In push-pull strategy, both repellent and or push plants are intercropped with the crop of interest, and attractant or pull plants are interplanted around the field. Ideally, the pull plant does not allow the pest to reproduce, and both push and pull plants also serve other functions, for example as ornamental plants, vegetables, spices, or as a food for livestock. An example is a push-pull system to protect maize against the pest stem borer and parasitic weed purple witchweed with 2 perennial crops, leguminous push crop Desmodium and pull crop Napier grass. In cultivated areas, resources for pest predators can be increased by tolerating the presence of some weeds, leaving crop residues on the soil surface that increase spider and carbide densities, and by constructing modular refuges, for example bee houses, and wire baskets stuffed with straw for spiders. Ground cover vegetation with cover crops or resident ground cover vegetation in orchards is another approach to increase within-field plant diversity. For example, grass legume refugee strips were demonstrated to increase the population density of predaceous carbide beetles in corn and soybean fields. Cover crops, in particular Brassicaceae and Tagetes marigolds, are used for controlling parasitic nematodes and apparently to repel insect pests as shown on this slide. Perennial intercrops are particularly valuable for providing permanent and less disturbed habitat for pest predators. For example, adding perennial crop alfalfa into a crop rotation of annuals, maize-soybean, and maize-soybean-wheat can increase predatory arthropods. With 77% of domesticated plants worldwide relying at least partially on sexual reproduction, ensuring adequate pollination could increase yield on average by 24%. Pollination should be especially enhanced for varieties which are less preferred by pollinators, As in case of many commercially available almond varieties, nectarless cultivars of melon, which needs to be interplanted with nectar-producing varieties, male sterile cultivars of carrot, cotton, or sunflower. In general, wild pollinators twice more efficient than honeybees, especially for those crops that require buzz pollination, such as tomatoes, kiwi fruit, and cranberries. And higher crop yield is achieved in the presence of both managed and wild pollinators. Strategies to improve wild bees focus on three key resources. Continuity and diversity of floral resources at the landscape scale. Availability of appropriate nesting sites in proximity to crop field. And refugia from hazards such as pesticides and disease. Enhancing only flowers can diminish services by distracting pollinators away from crops. Polycultures may be designed to support pollinator assemblages for specific crops, with the plants having respective flower structure that match the body size and structure of mouthparts of the target pollinators. Co-flowering species can experience competition when the attractiveness for pollinators substantially differ. Overabundance of flower resources may also shift interaction from facilitative to competitive. Main direct mechanisms for weed suppression in polyculture include resource and light competition with weeds, disruption of weed life cycles, stimulation of weed germination to reduce soil seed bank, physical suppression by crop residues, and release of phytotoxic chemicals. Providing early, dense and permanent ground cover using both commercial and cover crops is the main strategy for weed suppression. And crop traits linked to weed suppression include high biomass accumulation at the early crop stage, high leaf area, rapid canopy ground cover, early vigor, high tiller density, and droopy leaves. Crops such as rye, barley, wheat, tobacco, and oats release toxic substances into the environment, either through root exudation or from decaying plant material, that inhibits the germination and growth of some weed species. Allelopathic chemicals can be also toxic for intercropping plants or subsequent cash crop, as with certain varieties of cucumbers that suppress the growth of proso millet. Plants growing in harsh environments benefit from close association to stress-tolerant nurse plants due to abiotic stress amelioration. Interplanted nurse plants are used, for example, to reduce crop damage from heat waves and to increase water availability through shading, increased infiltration, and hydraulic lift, where plant roots act as a physical conduit, equalizing water potential gradient among roots and deep and shallow soil fractions. Finally, I would like to review two online tools for designing crop polycultures. Plants for a Future is an online free-to-use information database and associated websites for those interested in edible and useful plants. Originally focused on plants suitable for temperate regions, it has now been extended to include many of the more important tropical and subtropical edible and useful plants. Organization also publishes a number of books providing more detailed information about various plants groups and featuring most useful plants. The database is specifically focused on medicinal use of plants, and thus it represents a valuable resource for growers focused on herbal medicine for commercial or domestic purposes. You can design polycultures for a particular market segment based on edible uses, for example, herbal teas or natural oils. A variety of other uses available as database search queries. For example, if you want to design a diverse timber forest with valuable trees, suitable for your climate and soil conditions. There is a possibility to search for plants providing specific ecological services, design plant combination with staggered flowering time to provide continuous food supply for pollinators and for specific groups of pollinators, to retrieve plant lists for specific soil, climate or microclimate conditions, and to design multi-layered systems. The sources of this database include encyclopedia, handbooks, and plant catalogs. Another plant database is called Natural Plant Capital Database. The database has over 2,450 ecologically supportive, human-useful plants. Authors feature 2 books, The Perennial Lands, The Future Vision of a Restorative Agriculture, and Integrated Forest Gardening, The Complete Guide to Polycultures and Plant Guilds in Permaculture Systems. Distinctive feature of this database, which is available to paid subscribers, is the information on natural associates, members of native plant communities, cultivated polycultures, where authors distinguish between tested and untested polycultures and classify them into several groups, such as sustainable landscape for diversified production, agricultural suitable for commercial farming and mechanization, environmental to address large-scale environmental problems, restoration to restore natural areas, and wildlife to meet the food and habitat needs of specific wildlife populations. It also provides information on companion plants. As a living knowledge tool, the database usefulness is driven by the quality and quantity of input from contributing plant researchers, designers, and contributing subscribers. All information in the database is referenced, and a big part of the information, in particular on natural plant associates, is retrieved from the USDA plant database. In video description below, you will find the links to slides as well as references and highlights to publications cited in this video lecture. Finally, I invite growers of tree nut and fruit crops, all growers with experience in crop diversification, researchers and agriculture extension specialists to participate in one of the surveys listed on this slide. The links are also provided in description to this video. With your help, we will be able to develop free software to help farmers to design crop polycultures. We also invite you to subscribe to our Facebook page Polycultures and Permaculture, where we share useful information on crop polycultures from the academic publication and directly from growers. And we invite you to share your practical experience on this page. On our website, you will find recorded conference presentation, proceedings, and resolution of the Research and Practice Conference Polycultures and Permaculture, which was organized in January-February 2020. Thank you very much for your attention.